Okay, so I'm a little late to the party. This has been going on for a little while now, where different states across the country, especially in the South, are pushing bills into legislation in their state to ban certain queer related things among youth specifically. So in Tennessee, trans care is being banned, drag shows in schools is being banned. It's being called a very hateful agenda.
Among the latest moves in Republican-led campaigns across the U.S. targeting LGBTQ+ Americans, Tennessee Governor Bill Lee has signed into law two bills that passed the state legislature last week. One restricting drag performances in public, and the other banning gender-affirming healthcare.
I don't see why that's bad. Drag performances do have a sort of sexual content to them. It's not to say that drag shows are indecent, but in the wrong setting, it is. Like in public or in schools with kids.
For transgender youth. Lee said the drag bill, which comes into effect April 1st, would protect children from being, quote, potentially exposed to sexualized entertainment, to obscenity.
That's a very valid reason to want to ban drag shows in schools. Not for the stereotypical conservative reasons why we wouldn't want drag shows inside of schools, but because there's a real potential danger there. Not necessarily because of the people doing the shows, because oftentimes their intentions are pure. They're trying to normalize their identity. But that's not the danger. The danger is exposing kids to sexual content while simultaneously, while that child is seeing that content, telling them that it's innocent. What type of confliction might that cause in their brain later on?
Speaking to reporters last week, Lee, a Republican, also addressed a surfaced high school yearbook photo that appeared to show him wearing a cheerleader's dress.
And reactive.
In Tennessee, they are focused in on an attack on drag queens and banning or regulating drag performances as another way to pander to a base in the Republican Party that is very extreme and is pushing a...
It's not extreme. I hate this language being used, that it's extreme to say maybe we shouldn't have sexually charged imagery in front of kids. Maybe this could be a potential problem later. That's not extreme to say that. But this is, again, like, this is the sort of punishing you for having an opinion that is not congruous with theirs.
A very hateful agenda against LGBTQ people.
Civil rights groups and drag performers have noted that
it's not hateful. No one is saying that you can't be a drag, just not in front of kids. That's all. Gyrating your body around and, you know, having your boobs out. I've seen some of the videos of drag shows happening inside of kids' schools, and, you know, some of these people are in there in thongs and BDSM masks. I've seen a video of a young boy sitting in a chair while another grown adult, dressed scantily clad, was pretty much twerking around this little boy. So the imagery is sexually charged and children shouldn't be seeing it. It's not extreme to say that.
Tennessee, like other states, already bans obscenity in front of minors and calls the restrictions unconstitutional, vague, and redundant. The other bill bans doctors from providing gender-affirming medical treatment, such as puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and surgery.
It already bans obscenity in front of children. Okay, well, clearly it doesn't, because, again, we're seeing very sexually charged imagery being pushed in front of kids' drag shows in elementary school. So obscenity is already banned in front of children. Clearly it isn't. If it was, that wouldn't be happening. So a bill that states specifically drag is a part of that obscenity that we can't have in front of kids is clearly necessary.
To transgender minors.
Transgender people have come into the forefront more. They are asserting their rights. As with everything else with conservatives and, unfortunately, the Republican Party, they prey upon people's lack of information, lack of knowledge, and people, not really understanding things deeply.
The Tennessee bills are part of an upswing in Republican efforts to regulate the conduct and lives of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people. To Signorilli, whose activism stretches back to...
Well, let's be clear, it's not just Republicans who feel this way. There are some people in the queer community who will agree that it's getting a little extreme. It's getting a little absurd. We're wanting to cross lines that have never before been crossed, and for good reason, like putting this type of content in front of kids. And we're trying to blur every boundary that there is, and that's a problem, and that's going to lead to more trouble. If we're blurring lines that kind of protects our most vulnerable children, what's next? What's next? Okay, so that's Tennessee. Kentucky is also doing the same thing. Let's get into that. Sweeping anti-trans bill all across the board. They're getting it all in one bill.
Team was there in Frankfurt for the vote tonight. The bill bans gender-affirming medical care for minors, allows teachers to ignore a student's preferred pronouns, and trans students from using the restroom tied to their gender identities. WHAS 1119's Connor Stepp.
Okay. Bans gender-affirming care for minors. That is not because we hate queer people or we hate trans people. That is because there is not enough data in the medical field that tells us whether or not these kids are going to be safe in the long run if they are exposed to these things. There's not enough data there to say, oh yeah, this is totally fine. There won't be any repercussions for this later on. That hasn't been seen yet, and we can't just go based off of how we're feeling about these things, because these are people's lives. These are kids' lives. If we're out here chopping up kids and mutilating their bodies and getting gender confirming surgeries on minors, just for that to have issues later on down the road that we can't come back from, that's a problem. And for safety of these kids and their futures, it should be banned until we can have more information gathered on what the potential repercussions of this is going to be in 10 years or 15 years for these kids.
Journalist Elijah McKenzie have the emotional reaction.
Despite the desperate cries,
I'm embarrassed and I'm appalled and I'm scared. I won't know.
and impassioned pleas,
How dare you? You're gonna kill kids. Their blood will be on your hands.
Kentucky GOP lawmaker
You're gonna kill kids. That does not seem like fear mongering, telling people that kids are going to die if we don't let them mutilate their bodies and do permanent things to their bodies. So that's the danger with saying that. You're going to kill kids. These kids are going to die if you don't allow them gender affirming care or gender confirming care, which is when you get the surgery and it's done, you get your breast removed or you get genitalia chopped up. That is dangerous to say to parents, because it's leaning on the fact that these parents love their kids. And of course, no parent who loves their child wants their child to die because they didn't let their kid do something permanent to their body. So of course, these parents are going to believe that because, you know, they love their kids, and they're going to line up to have this done to their kids, to have their kids taking hormone blockers and getting surgeries on their bodies. So that right there, that using that language like that to sort of manipulate, because that's what it is, it's manipulation. It's manipulating parents who care about their kids into doing something very permanent to their children by telling them, if you don't do this, your kids are going to die. That should be illegal. They shouldn't be able to say things like that without repercussion, especially doctors. Doctors are saying these things to parents. Psychiatrists, psychologists are saying these things to parents, telling parents, if you don't get this done, your child's going to kill themselves. That is fear mongering. I don't know of a better example of fear mongering than that. Because what is a parent supposed to do when you tell them that, other than allow you to shoot their kids up with drugs and chop up their bodies out of fear that they're going to lose their child if they don't do it? So using language like that in these types of situations should be illegal. You shouldn't be allowed to do that and to scare the hell out of parents.
I would thank you for your time, but I am honest to God so embarrassed, ashamed, and for the first time in my life, I wish I was not a Kentuckian.
It's hard to put into words.
Kind of made me giggle on the inside a little bit. Again, I'm sympathetic to wanting to become a part of the norm, but there has to come a point where we have to ask ourselves, to what extent do we allow people in our democratic society, to what extent do we allow people to pursue their own liberty, their own happiness, and then at what point do we draw the line and say, no, this is actually dangerous and this cannot be allowed? It's getting so far out of hand. Like, at what point do we say, yes, children should be able to explore their identity and try to figure out what type of people they are? And then where do we draw the line and say, okay, this is going to be dangerous for kids and we can't allow this? There has to be a line drawn somewhere. We can't allow concessions on everything. Drawing these lines isn't bad. It's not oppressive. It's something that's necessary to say, no, this is dangerous. This is hurting people. This will hurt people. The repercussions of this cannot be seen so far, so it's a no. We can't experiment. We can't experiment with kids and their lives. So yeah, at some point, kind of have to ask ourselves, to what extent do we allow a human being their rights to pursue their own personal liberty and autonomy? And then to what point, or what is our duty considering that to protecting children, even if sometimes that means protecting children from themselves. So a line has to be drawn somewhere.
Republican Senator Max Wise and Representative David Meade blindsided everyone, reviving what was thought to be a dead Senate Bill 150.
There's evidence that this is harmful to children. And that's our job, is to protect children, and that's what we're doing here.
The new expanded version includes far-reaching measures. It would have school districts create explicit bathroom policies, forcing trans students to abide by their biological sex. It also bans gender...
You know what I find interesting? There seems to be today more trans children than ever. I don't ever, when I was a child in elementary school, middle school, ever remember seeing trans boys and girls walking around school. Suddenly today, there are more trans children than ever before, and it just seems a little, it gives me reason for pause, because it's like, how do we know that these kids are actually of their own volition choosing to be trans? Like, majority of these kids are probably on the internet watching videos and absorbing that and applying it to themselves, because that's what kids do. That's what kids do. They learn by watching. So if these kids, the most probably technologically advanced kids in history, I mean, these children today are like born with telephones in their hands and cell phones in their hands and tablets. So they have access to information that I did not have as a kid, that other generations did not have as kids. These kids are being exposed to a lot of political conversations that they should not be exposed to, like this queer stuff going on. So how many of these kids are actually choosing to be queer without knowing what trans is? Without ever having knowledge of that, how many of them would say, yeah, I'm trans? It says to me that these kids are on the internet, they're looking at this stuff, and they're absorbing this stuff and applying it to themselves, because that's what kids do. And for that reason, we shouldn't be jumping to these conclusions that, yes, this child is trans. No, they're likely not. They likely just saw some stuff on the internet that they shouldn't have been looking at. These are very mature conversations, and kids should not have access to them. Prepubescent, like pre-maturation, they should not have access to these types of conversations, as they are very adult and very mature. But that's part of the danger with putting this type of stuff in front of kids and letting them see it, and letting them think that it's normal to kind of chop up your body just on whim. Just, oh, I want to be a boy now, so I'm gonna go and get my body mutilated. Why do we want kids to see that, knowing how easily influenced and naive children can be?
Gender affirming care for anyone in Kentucky under the age of 18. That's both surgical procedures.
Okay, that makes sense. Under the age of 18. This bill, they're really pushing this bill to seem as though it's extreme. And it's not. It's saying what any other law that prohibits, that has age restrictions. It's saying if you're under the age of 18, you can't be exposed to sexually explicit content, so drag shows are out of the question. And that's normal. That's normal. If you go to a drag club, I forget what they're called, but you go to a drag club, a BDSM club or whatever, you can't get in unless you are 18 years old. So naturally, why are drag shows coming to schools where there are children below the age of 18? That's not extreme. That's like a normal thing. You can't get into a club where there are people dressed scantily clad unless you are 18 years or older. You can't drink alcohol unless you're 21. You can't buy it, at least. Can't smoke and buy cigarettes unless you're 18 or older. So there are certain things that we put age restrictions on, and for good reason. And this is one of those reasons. This to me is not extreme. The same reason we wouldn't allow a child to go into a nightclub is the same reason we shouldn't want the nightclub to come into our kids' schools.
Procedures and non-surgical procedures.
We are attacking a group of vulnerable people, as we're calling late meetings, and sneaking bills in. This is not good government.
The director of Planned Parenthood told me this bill is the farthest reaching anti-trans legislation in the entire country. Supporters say it backs parental rights.
If you watched the committee or were in the committee, you would have seen the testimony from certain doctors and certain mental health therapists.
Yes, absolutely. If there are parents out there who say, I don't want my kids to be a part of all of this, where do I get a say in this? And if I say something, why am I vilified for it and told that I'm transphobic for saying I don't want my child to be a part of this? They're too young to be a part of this conversation. So where's protection for those parents? If it's all about rights, these parents have rights who don't want their kids to be exposed to this type of imagery and conversation just yet. They're too young for it. So this is supporting parents who say, I don't want my child seeing grown men and grown women dressed near naked, gyrating their bodies around in front of my kids. I don't want my kids seeing that. I don't want my kids being exposed to the, 100 pronouns that there are out there, which is going to cause gender confusion in children who are just now learning their body and what their body is, and on top of already trying to learn what the very complex system is that is their body, they're also on top of that having to learn all of these different pronouns and what each of them mean and how they could be one of them. And no.
Professionals, so yes, there were some consultants.
But opponents believe it will lead young queer Kentuckians to leave the state or worse.
Please think about a kid that you know. Think about how you would feel if a kid you knew couldn't get access to medical care and they came home and you found them dead.
The General Assembly will have time to override any vetoes. Lawmakers return for that in 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's fear-mongering. Once again, what a crazy thing to say to someone. Could you imagine someone saying that to you? Oh, I don't think I want my kid to be exposed to all of this right now. They're a little young. They're really just figuring themselves out now. On top of that, they need to also come to understand all of these pronouns and all of these sexual identities and all of these gender identities too. That just seems like that's going to cause a lot of confusion for my kids, so I'm going to say no for now. And then that person says to you, what? Well, your child is going to die. That's crazy.